6 torpedoes, and I know that the ship is doomed.
It was the mission that ended a world war and sparked a mystery that has endured for nearly 80 years. The USS Indianapolis is one of the most famous naval tragedies in history, a story of heroism, sacrifice, and nightmare fuel in the Pacific depths. We think we know the tale. But what if the official story is wrong? Why were there desperate cries for help heard and then ignored? Why was the ship's captain made the sole villain for a disaster that wasn't his fault? And why did the U.S. government work so hard to bury the truth until the moment the war was won? This is a story shrouded in secrecy, stained by injustice, and haunted by the unknown. From a captain scapegoated for a crime he didn't commit, to the shocking reason their rescue was delayed for days. Stick with us, because today we are counting down the 8 strange things that never made sense about the USS Indianapolis. But before we begin, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. On July 26, 1945, the USS Indianapolis concluded a mission that would alter the course of world history by transporting the vital components for the initial operational atomic device to the island of Tinian. There, the elements would be constructed into the infamous atomic bomb called Little Boy. Merely a few days afterward, it would be unleashed upon the Japanese city of Hiroshima, devastating an estimated 80,000 individuals. Following the successful delivery, the Indianapolis received orders to meet the USS Idaho in the Philippines. Their objective was to provide support for the planned invasion of the Japanese mainland. The vessel proceeded alone toward its new assignment, maintaining a pace of 17 knots. The voyage was calm initially, but the USS Indianapolis would shortly experience a journey ending in an abrupt and brutal stop. It was just past midnight on July 30, 1945, when a Japanese submarine fired 2 torpedoes into the flank of the Indianapolis. The impact was direct and catastrophic, breaking the ship in 2. The command to evacuate was issued swiftly, though not swiftly enough for everyone. The enormous cruiser sank in a mere 12 minutes, and numerous souls were lost. In fact, approximately 300 sailors remained imprisoned within as the ship descended. They were never seen again. A further 900 or so entered the water. They could not have known it then, but their destiny was to be, in many ways, more terrible than that of those who perished with the vessel. The Indianapolis sank rapidly, and the ensuing turmoil caused many injuries and a critical shortage of proper gear for the survivors. An estimated 879 servicemen lived through the initial sinking, though a great number failed to secure life preservers in time, forcing them to struggle endlessly to keep their heads above water. Those who succeeded in obtaining life vests were only marginally better off, discovering they could do little more than drift helplessly upon the swells. A significant portion of the sailors were wounded, having sustained deep lacerations or fractured bones from the torpedo blasts. Stranded in the sea without even a life raft, they possessed no means to attend to their wounds. As if these circumstances were not dire enough, nearly every man was drenched in fuel oil seeping from the sunken vessel's ruins. The exposure was so severe that sailors had already started to perish in the arms of their comrades, there in the open water. The Indianapolis went down swiftly, but during those 12 minutes, the courageous crew dispatched SOS signals until it was utterly impossible to continue. These distress calls were picked up by the Navy, yet for reasons that are still unclear, they were dismissed. Even when the vessel did not reach its destination as scheduled, no one grew concerned. No rescue missions were launched to find the ship or its crew. The ship had sunk, and for the crew, no measures were taken whatsoever. By dawn, there was literal blood in the water, and sharks were drawn to the scene. Conscious of their presence, the survivors tried to remain in clusters as they floated. Yet, no matter their efforts, individuals would inevitably become separated, and the ocean's pull would sweep them away. Once a survivor was alone, the sharks would close in and strike quickly. Those who lived recalled that everyone could hear the screams before a person was dragged beneath the waves, after which only their preserver would resurface. This persisted for days. Although the threat of shark attacks was a persistent menace for the men adrift, one occurrence granted a few a temporary respite. Some of the sailors who had been trapped inside the Indianapolis as it sank would periodically rise up from the depths. The sharks were equally content to prey on these lifeless forms, as they presented far less resistance. Sadly, while these floaters and the wreckage itself delayed the survivors' devastation, ultimately it was insufficient to rescue very many. By that time, the sharks were in a state of feeding madness, and the number of living was dwindling. So, in spite of this brief relief, the survivors were forced to withstand additional days of assaults from the sharks. The sharks pulled their prey beneath the surface into the deep. Each assault made the water more saturated with blood, which only served to intensify the sharks' frenzy. While the sharks posed the most persistent threat, they were by no means the sole peril the survivors faced. Adrift in the salt water, the men had no fresh water to drink, and after being exposed for multiple days, many perished from dehydration. Those who gave in and drank the seawater soon suffered from delusions and hallucinations. Their life preservers were also becoming increasingly saturated, making the struggle to remain buoyant much more difficult. As a result, numerous men succumbed to the sea and drowned long before any shark could approach them. On the third day, several of the men located floating crates and fastened them into a single unit. Although this assembly was too unstable to function as a reliable raft, it proved valuable for a different vital purpose: to dry their saturated life preservers. The sailors would manually wring out the preservers, place them on top of the improvised platform, and then put them back on after they had dried. This approach helped more of the stranded men stay buoyant for an extended time. In a fortunate turn, one crate contained partially decayed potatoes, which the survivors prudently apportioned to maintain their strength as best they could. At 11 a.m. on the fourth day, the group was inadvertently sighted by Lieutenant Wilbur C. Gwynn, who was conducting a routine patrol mission in a bomber. He urgently radioed for support. The USS Cecil J. Doyle, a destroyer operating relatively close by, was alerted. On his own authority, the ship's captain altered course to recover the survivors. Lieutenant Adrian Marks, at the controls of a seaplane sent to airdrop rafts and supplies, observed sharks menacing the survivors. He then maneuvered his aircraft to pluck sailors who were most exposed and vulnerable from the water. The seaplane eventually became so crowded that he had to secure survivors to the wings with parachute lines. By nightfall, Adrian Marks had rescued 56 individuals. When the commander of the Doyle reached the location, he disregarded all caution and trained a powerful searchlight into the sky to signal other rescue ships in the vicinity. As the war was still ongoing, this action placed his vessel in significant peril, but he understood that every moment was critical. Even with his determination, by the conclusion of the rescue mission, only 317 of the initial 879 survivors were brought back to safety alive. A deeply disheartening number, particularly considering the ship's original complement had been 1,196 sailors. All the others had perished from starvation, dehydration, their wounds, or the sharks. The entire Navy was stunned and angered that such a tragedy had been permitted to occur to the crew of the Indianapolis. However, since their assignment had been to transport components for an atomic weapon, no one was in a position to publicly disclose the full details of the event. The United States government concealed the disaster for a full 2 weeks. In that period, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were both bombed. the former with a weapon constructed from the parts delivered by the USS Indianapolis. The U.S. finally disclosed the news about the Indianapolis on August 15, 1945, the very day Japan declared its surrender. This timing almost ensured the story would be overshadowed by the headlines of victory. Several months following the tragic event, Charles McVay, the commanding officer of the USS Indianapolis, faced a military court. The charge asserted that McVay had neglected to steer his vessel in an evasive pattern, a maneuver that might have confused any pursuing Japanese submarines. If you are questioning whether this represented the Navy making a captain the scapegoat for a fabricated infraction to alleviate its own institutional shame, you're in good company. Numerous observers have highlighted that McVay was the sole captain to be disciplined for the loss of a ship throughout all of World War II. Even the U.S. Congress ultimately determined the accusation was without merit and formally exonerated him of any misconduct in the year 2000. Regrettably, this vindication came after his death, as McVay had died by his own hand in 1968. The legacy of the Indianapolis remains shrouded in difficult questions. Was this tragedy unavoidable, or the result of errors and secrecy? Why was no rescue sent? Why was the captain singled out and the truth buried until after the war's end? History doesn't always offer clear answers. Some truths are lost to the fog of war, leaving us to piece together the fragments. What do you believe was the real reason behind the silence? Share your perspective in the comments. Sometimes history is defined not by the answers we have, but by the mysteries we can't forget.